Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast, your weekly look inside the world of fly fishing presented by Pete Tigers. If you're enjoying listening, please consider subscribing.
Welcome back to the podcast. I wanted to start by asking a small favour. Christmas is fast approaching and we'll be thinking about food for the festive period. I was hoping that if you're out shopping that you'll pass the salmon on the counter in the supermarket and not buy it. And if a member of your family asks about festive food, that you'll say you'll eat anything but salmon. Perhaps if we can spread the harmful effects of salmon rearing process and the eating of it, that we might just start making some inroads into getting things changed. If nothing else, it might make those who are not members of the fishing community aware of what's going on. Many thanks. Right, public information broadcast over, on to my guest. David Walker has been a contributor to Fly Culture and is an all-round fly angler who has a passion for lochs and rivers. He has competition fished for Scotland and is, by his own admission, a tackle hoarder. I plan to learn about his fishing career and pick up some tips along the way too. David, great to have you here. Thanks for dropping by. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, Pete. Thank you very much. Thanks again for asking me to come on here. Your podcasts have got me through numerous home gym sessions, gardening sessions, local walks. You know, it's great just to put the earpods on and listen to the most recent guest. The most recent one there was Bob Wyatt for me. Fantastic. So yeah, absolute pleasure to be on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. I know we'd had a little chat on social media about something or other. I think it was on Twitter, and I said, I've got to get you along and hear your story. And it's a wonderful story. But I wanted to talk first about the weather and how that impacts your fishing, in the sense of, you know, the weather's more miserable, it's cooler. People are thinking about tying flies. Are you a prolific winter tyer, or do you tie throughout the year? How do you approach that? Is it now that you sit down, get the fire going, and start tying some flies?
I need to be honest, Pete. I've got several really, really good friends that are amazing fly tyers, and your listeners will probably have heard of them. Guys like Craig McDonald, Hugh Skierk, another lad, Kenny Finlayson. These guys, I have boxes full of their patterns, and fortunately or unfortunately for me, I don't think I would ever get to the level that these guys can tie flies at. So I'm quite happy to give them money, more than the going rate, to produce me boxes of absolutely top quality flies. The last flies I tied would probably be a championship I was in the Europeans in Poland, 2016. I remember tying 200 squirmy wormies because that was working. And it's an abomination of a fly. I mean, I actually feel dirty saying it. It's a terrible fly. But I tied 200 up for the team because that just happened to be working. Our guide reckoned that would be the fly of choice. And I kind of sickened myself with that. So I'll hand on heart, that's probably the last time I've had the vice out. I can tie flies, but as I said, I would rather let these guys that can tie amazing flies, I'd rather have them in my box. To be honest, I'm nowhere near the level of those lads.
And that's a good shout. I think I've come to that realisation as well. And I have friends, and you mentioned Craig, and I know we've talked about the Duracell, which amongst many other flies that he's come up with is a fabulous pattern, and for me, a great winter one. And the squirmy thing, it's funny, isn't it, how these flies go in and out of fashion. And I know I was fishing with my friend Brett, and there was some nice grayling on the river, and I said, well, we're gentlemen, we don't need to put a squirmy on. And I went upstream a little bit and then came back down. These fish just didn't want to know. And I came back down and I said, Brett, I've got an ambition that I tried one, and I could see it didn't even want to touch it, and I let it dead drift. I manipulated it a little bit, all those sorts of things, and it was going down the side of the fish with it not even flickering. And he said to me, thanks for telling me, because I did exactly the same. And it's funny, that fly it is interesting, isn't it, how these patterns, and I just mentioned obviously the Duracell, and the Duracell I think is one of those flies that will just stay in my fly box. But things like the squirmy, I'm sure many people have them in their fly box, probably don't use them as much. There was that period. And do you think we go through these moments of there's a new material, there's a new fly, there's a must-have, and then we move on to the next, and then sometimes forget classic patterns that work equally as well or in a different way. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah. I think if you've been fishing, especially if you've been fishing, I want to say if you've been fishing for more than 5 minutes, nothing's kind of new in fly fishing. Going back to the squirmy wormy, as much as I would never fish one now that I'm more of a pleasure angler than anything else, the fly is very effective. I remember using it for my first session in that particular championship in Poland, and the first 9 casts I had 8 fish. Seven of them were brown trout, and they weren't counting. It was only grayling over 25 centimetres. I think my 10th cast then brought a grayling. But it's an incredibly effective fly, especially if the water's a little bit high and dirty. The fish just key right on it because it's either bright red, bright pink, that kind of thing. Regarding Craig's Duracell, I mean, Craig will hate me for saying this. I think lots of people have it and lots of people swear by it. I've never got on with it, to be honest. And, I'm one of Craig's best mates, and we've fished lots together, and I've had it on my cast, and he's had fish with it when he's fishing it, and I've not had fish. So I don't even think I've got a Duracell in my box, to be honest, which is weird because all of my boxes have got numerous patterns of Craig's other than the Duracell. It's just a fly I've never really got on with. And I'm sure you probably know the origins of that story as well. That fly was, I think Craig he was doing a tying session, and he had lots of scrap lying round about his table, and rather than put some of it away, he just started putting things together on a hook, and he came up with the Duracell. And I think another guy, another kind of famous angler up here, a guy called Dave Downey, I think he christened it the Duracell because whenever he was fishing with Craig wouldn't settle down on the riverbank. He was constantly up and down. He just wouldn't take a rest. Very much like the Duracell bunny kind of thing. But yeah, going back to your initial question, yeah, we're terrible for anglers, aren't we? When something new comes out, everyone must have it, and then you'll fish with it for quite a while. It'll produce results, but I get this thing in fishing where it's probably going to be a kind of long story here, but most people think pink work quite well for grayling. So if everyone fishes pink for grayling, people are going to catch fish, then perpetuating the myth. There was another story. I was fishing down Rutland a few years ago, and the guy at the tackle shop, where you obviously pay for your boat and stuff, he had said the North Arm isn't fishing, so head up the South Arm. Me and my friend Kerry Finlayson at the time, we accidentally went up the North Arm. Not entirely sure how we managed that, but we went up the North Arm and we had a good day's fishing, and we came back and we said, you know what, the North Arm was really good. So again, it's one of these myths that if people keep perpetuating or keep doing the same thing, you're going to get results, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
As I say, it's, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that, in that if someone says to me, that's not fishing, then I'll go there. Yeah, and I think those things sort of feed themselves. And it's interesting what you said about the Duracell. And I guess the chances of you catching a fish on a Duracell right now are pretty close to zero on the basis that you don't have them. And it's funny, isn't it? Is that I'm absolutely convinced that confidence in fly selection plays a key. And for me, that fly for me is one that will be near the top of something that I'll probably tie on. I liked it because I loved the CDC hackle on it and everything else. That I just really like that fly, and it seems to work well for me. And I know when I've got it on, I'm going to fish more confidently. And I think these things are self-perpetuating, aren't they? That you can suddenly go down that route. And like you say, with a fishing point of view, I remember I was fishing in the States. It was a spring creek in Montana, and I was down there with a group of people, and there was a guy there, and I said, does anyone use CDC? And he said no. So immediately, now I don't know if that was no because it didn't work, or no, nobody's used it, but immediately that was the first fly I tied on, and immediately I started catching fish as a result of it. And I think it is good to question these things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very much like sheep anglers. You know, a new piece of kit comes out. I mean, you know, I love my gear. But a new piece of kit comes out, everyone goes to buy it. We're very much like sheep, I think, especially with fly tying materials as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got full fly boxes at the moment. Does that mean grayling are on the agenda at the moment? Have you got some grayling fishing planned?
So I was a very prolific grayling fisher. I used to wish my summers away so I could be standing in the middle of a freezing cold river, launching tungsten about, scraping the bottom for grayling. I luckily had access to a couple of beats on the River Nith. I think I done one of a piece story for Eat Sleep Fish on the River Nith, and I had a good 5-6 years at it. Lots and lots of fish, lots of big fish, really big fish. You'd be going down there expecting to catch something in the 2 to maybe £3 range, and a £3 grayling is quite rare. I mean, maybe looking at social media these days, you would think they're quite common, but they're incredibly rare fish. But on the Nith, you weren't just getting a chance of 1 or 2 of these, you'd be getting a whole bag of them. You'd be getting in there 20, 30, 40 fish a day, which is fantastic fishing. So I used to fish the Nith quite a lot. I would go down with a mate or two, usually stay down for a couple of nights, kind of fill my boots, and then maybe go down another couple of times during the close season, and that would kind of do me until the trout season got back up. But how I got into grayling fishing was I had a large break from my teenage years, kind of more concentrating on other things, football and such, and Craig got back in touch with Craig McDonald. I'd met Craig when I was a kind of young lad, still at high school. Craig was one of the kind of the pro golfers at a golf course. I had a wee brief flirtation with golf. Met Craig there. We somehow got talking about fishing. Realised he fished as well, and ever since then we've been kind of best buddies. So when after that break, I got back into fishing. Craig had said, let's go for the grayling. And we had a day on the River Clyde, which was probably kind of my home water. And obviously during the close season for trout, we had a day on the Clyde fishing clink and dink. We call that the duo or the trio up here. And we had a fabulous day. I think from memory, we had about 50 fish between us. Nothing particularly massive, but 50 fish between two angles is a good day. That's a great day in anybody's book. And so the bug then was truly set in. I think after that day, I'd headed up into Glasgow and into the town centre, got myself some new grayling and nymphing gear, and then our next trip was on the River Tweed, and with a cracking day on the Tweed, some bigger fish, not quite as many, but from there the kind of bug was truly in, and from there, as I said, I kind of graduated onto the Nith. Not so much graduated, moved on to the Nith just because it was fishing, and I certainly got the best of that before it started to slide, before everyone started to realise how good it was fishing, and then you would struggle to get on beats. There was a little bit of kind of not quite cricket, should I say. People were buying salmon tickets so they would get on the river early, which unfortunately in this day and age, given the decline in salmon fishing, some of the beat owners were quite happy to have that income coming in and not particularly watching what the guys were actually fishing for. So they would go down and pay, 40, 50 quid for a day's fishing for the grayling, which I don't know how that compares with prices down south for you guys, but up here that's quite expensive for a day's fishing, never mind grayling fishing. And these guys were getting first crack at the grayling, and that kind of went on. And I kind of get put off a wee bit by that. By that point, I'd also had my fill, so to speak. And I also think my last session on the last season on the Nith, I'd managed to get on a private syndicate water. The guy there kind of left it to me to try and fill the spots, and I remember getting you'll know Matt Eastham, Stuart Minikin. I remember getting those guys involved, and we had 6 anglers for this whole beat for the whole season, the whole close season, and it was kind of new water to us, and again that held some really good fish, and I think I stopped that the year after because the guy had realised how good the fishing was and he put his prices quite high up. So at that point, I kind of came away from it a little bit. So for the last, kind of long way around to answer your question there, but I think in the last few seasons, I've not been out anywhere near as much. I kind of tend to fish quite hard during the trout season, and barring maybe 1 or 2 days at it through the close season, that kind of does me just until the trout starts again. But nice. I certainly don't miss getting out there in a right cold river. -5, -6, -7, whatever, frozen rod rings, and yeah, it's great when you're getting fish, but then you remember how cold it is, and you think, oh, maybe just stay in the house.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Matt and Stuart, both friends of the podcast, both being guests on there. It's interesting you come circling back round on the Nith and what you were saying there. I'm guessing that was probably pre-social media days, slightly. So does word just travel locally, or did you find people were discovering this via, I guess, Facebook or whatever that may be? Because I guess I'm using Instagram as a case of more so an explosion in social media. And did you think that was why those sorts of things were happening, that word got out and then the river, as a result of that, was seeing a lot of attention?
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, Pete. I remember Craig and I been down one day. It was a beat, the beats are well known now. It was a beat called Burjarg, and when I started fishing in this, very, very, very few people were on it. You could have your pick of the days. During the close season, you would have access to the very nice salmon hut that was there, and you'd be the only anglers on the water. Craig and I went down one day. Perfect grayling conditions, nice clear skies. Really cold, you knew the fish would be kind of huddled up once you found the shoal. The river was just the perfect height, not too low, not too high. It was crystal clear. It was perfect conditions. And when Craig and I got there, we bumped into a guy called Robert Irvin, who was doing an article for Trout and Salmon. Excuse me. For Trout and Salmon, and he had his photographer with him. And Craig and I both looked at each other and thought, right, once this gets out, this place will be mobbed, and pretty much that's what happened. That particular day, I've actually still kept that magazine, the article for it. It was a very good article from Robert, and that day, Robert made reference to the fact that obviously because the grayling days are much colder, you had to keep working for the fish, keep searching the water. I remember Robert being ahead of us, and I was just below him working our way upstream, and Robert came out of the water maybe about 5-6 yards too early. I went by where he was, and I suddenly started picking up fish. And for the next 3 or 4 hours, Craig and I absolutely battered it. We took some cracking fish out of there, and Robert came back in, and he'd said to us, he says, lads, do you mind if I come through I get some pictures for the article? And at that point, I couldn't feel my feet or my legs anymore, so I came back out and went, do you know what? Going in, I've filled my boots, I'm happy. And then Robert started getting fish. But yeah, to answer your question, I think when I started fishing in this, social media wasn't anywhere near what it was. I mean, I don't even think Instagram was about then, but you certainly had Twitter and fishing forums. There was one forum in particular, the River Clyde forum, that suddenly got onto the Nith. And again, they were arranging trips down. And obviously everyone that goes down there, I think people need to be really careful of what they put online, because some beats can handle pressure, some can't. When I wrote that article for you on Eat, Sleep, Fish, I did make reference to that. I mean, surely the Nith can't sustain the quality of fishing that's been going out, it's been putting out, and sure enough, it certainly declined. I haven't been keeping in touch with how it's been lately. But the fishing back then was absolutely phenomenal, and I just don't think it'll ever get back to that unless it gets a good rest. I also think grayling are quite cyclical in terms of some rivers go through a kind of boom and bust spell. The Nith at that time was certainly boom, and it's obviously suffering now. I mean, I remember one of the last few sessions I was on it, you would also come across guys trotting. They were taking 100 fish out of a pool. That's frightening numbers, absolutely frightening numbers. And these guys were proud of that. And I'm thinking, how much is enough? I mean, sure, I say that earlier on in the podcast here, I was talking about 20 and 30 fish. That's a lot of fish for me. I get quite bored at that point. But 100 fish out of a pool, that to me is, as anglers, we should maybe just be pulling back from that. Say enough's enough. So yeah, the Nith certainly suffered by word getting out that on forums, on social media, on Facebook posts, we're quite dangerous to rivers, as well as anglers look after rivers. I think some of us can be quite dangerous for rivers. So yeah, the social media is as good as it is, and we're all on it. I think we do have a responsibility to try and protect some of our rivers that can't handle that pressure.
That's a really interesting point. And I was going to circle round on that, because what you'd said about not fishing so much now, comparable to previous, and you have mentioned, we had 30 fish, and then it seems to me as though you've moved away from that. And was that a catalyst for that? Because like you say, 100 fish out of a pool, there's going to be mortalities within that. Fish handling, no matter what, there's going to be mortalities, and enough is enough. And that's one of those things. And I guess you were saying as well, I was also thinking about what you were saying about grayling fishing on that river becoming more popular. That must have come around with the nymphing technique starting to become more mainstream. And it's a devastating way of fishing the water, isn't it? And like you say, and I've said on here a number of times, sometimes enough, you've had a few and that's enough. And then you move it on and you leave the fish alone and move on. And do you think that was a tipping point for you to say, actually, yeah, I think you don't need to catch 50 fish or whatever it is, or 30 fish out of a pool? Do you think that was a catalyst for that changing thinking?
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, Pete. Actually, yeah, I've certainly. I think there's a thing in fishing where you try to catch the most fish, and then I can't remember how it goes. Actually, you kind of, the more you fish, the more you kind of obviously mature. It's not about how many you catch. For me nowadays, it's getting out and de-stressing from the day job, getting into nature. I'm equally happy going with a good friend or going by myself. And even though at the end of the day you may be physically tired because you've walked a lot of miles in a pair of waders, you've waded a lot, you've made a lot of casts to rise and fish, at the end of the day you feel recharged. Maybe not physically, but certainly mentally. And that's kind of where I'm at with my fishing just now. But going back to your point, yeah, I think the advent of new nymphing techniques, and these techniques are deadly, absolutely deadly. I fished a few championships. I've seen the best in the world at nymphing. I've got friends that are very good at nymphing. I'll go back to Craig McDonald. We had recent days on the River Tay there. Craig doesn't have any caps for Scotland, but Craig could have as many caps if he wanted, if he could be bothered. He's a very good angler, especially very good at nymphing. And on the days on the River Tay, Craig would outscore me, 10 fish to 1 on the nymphs. He would go through runs that I just went in and I'd maybe only pick one fish up. He'd be picking 3 or 4. What that I've already fished, he would be going through and just taking numerous fish from that. So he's a very, very good nymph angler. But yeah, I don't think any fish is safe on the river now, especially with the French leader and the depth you can get down to with some of these nymphs. Way back before that stuff was I'll say invented. Fish were safe on certain bits of the river that you couldn't get to. You couldn't get the depth, you couldn't get the drift. Now you can do all of that. So yeah, certainly fish are certainly not safe in any bits of the river. Which, how do you say that? Do you say that that's a bad thing for rivers in terms of that's going to obviously I'll say decimate fish stocks, but like you mentioned earlier about fish mortality, yeah, we certainly will be losing more fish because we're catching more fish. But yeah, that's a hard one to answer, because as fishermen we like to catch fish, but certainly for me, I'm happy having a nice day out, getting a couple of fish, and that I'm happy at that. Really happy at that.
Yeah, I've noticed, and I'll use it. It is, as you say, a great and a devastating technique. And I use it when I think it's appropriate. This is only my view. I worry sometimes it would make one-dimensional anglers that will only fish one method. And I've discovered, and again, it may be getting older that I'm doing that I've fished the duo sometimes through winter now. And I'll also fish an indicator and cast the fly line and see how I get on. And it makes, only from my personal standpoint, it's fun to do, and it doesn't matter. I'm kind of like you, that it doesn't bother me how many fish I catch or don't catch. And I like to mix things up a little bit. And yeah, there is that little bit sometimes I think it's almost a crutch or that's the way that I will catch fish. And like I've said many times on here, that I understand people don't get to go fishing as much as I do, perhaps, and possibly yourself as well, certainly in trout season by the sound of it, that they want to catch a few fish. So I understand that aspect of it as well. But I think, I like to mix stuff up just to make it interesting. And that's part of the fun. And do you find now that you're doing that you may fish a trio or a duo or a indicator or whatever? Do you find you mix it up, or you will tend to this time of year stick to that technique?
Yeah, I think interesting going back to the one-dimensional angles. I've got some experience of that when I first started fishing in the Sniffle League, the Scottish National Fly Fishing League. It brought a lot of people in there to try and compete, and a lot of these guys that were coming in could only fish the French leader. They couldn't cast a conventional fly line, and I think that's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. These guys would, fair play to them coming in and trying to learn these new techniques. But fly fishing for me is not putting on a French leader and two small nymphs. That's such a niche part of our sport. But that was be all and end all for a lot of guys. So certainly they were very, very one-dimensional. Regarding what I do just now, a typical day on the river for grayling at this particular time would involve the duo or the trio to search the water, because again you don't have that long time of daylight hours. So the more than likely the trio would be on, and I'd be going down pools quickly with it, trying to locate fish. And again, once you hit a shoal of grayling, you can sit there and pick away at them. If they become a little bit more spookier, again, you could probably switch over to the French leader and just put that a little bit more, put a little bit more finesse in with your presentation. During the trout season, it would be incredibly rare if I was to fish a nymph. I remember a couple of times on the River Devon, the northeast of Scotland, fishing with Craig, and Craig knows I'm pretty much dry fly only now, whereas Craig will fish anything to get fish. And if I'm struggling to get a fish, they're not rising or whatever, Craig's spanking them on the nymphs. I'll maybe sneak a wee nymph on, and he'll see the wee plop when he looks up and sees my cast, and then he'll be sitting there slating me for the next hour for having to resort to nymphs and stuff. But no, a typical day during the trout season for me is dry fly only, waiting for a riser or going walking looking for a riser. During the grayling season during the colder months, certainly nymphs trio to search a lot of water. Once you find them, then you can just pick away at them.
Yeah, nice. And it's not a snobbish or elitist thing I'm saying that. I think I'm with you in what you said about casting the fly line. I come from a casting background. There is nothing more pleasing than making a really nice cast, getting a really nice drift, and enjoying. That's part of it. And I guess, you said about golf and Craig as well from a golf pro, that I think there are some parallels between casting a fly line and hitting a golf ball in that. And perhaps that may be why it's pleasing to you from that point of view. And if it is a gateway into fishing, fine. I don't have a problem with it. I think mine is extracting the maximum amount of number of fish out of a pool that you possibly can. Is the thing. I think it's good to give the fish a little bit of a breather and leave a few of them alone. So that's where I'm from there. But we're talking, you were saying about leaving fishing for a little bit in your teenage years, but I thought it was interesting to talk about your work as well, because do you want to explain to the listeners what your work is? And because I wonder if the work that you do affects how you look at fishing as well. So perhaps tell us a little bit about your job and what that involves.
Okay. So no one will have heard of this. I'll be amazed if any of your listeners have heard of this job title. I'm a clinical perfusion scientist. That involves I work in an operating theatre primarily for heart surgery. And if you are unlucky enough or unfortunate enough to require heart surgery, the surgeon obviously has to work on your heart, sorting that repair out, whether it be any valve replacements, valve repairs, coronary artery surgery, heart transplants. Lots come under the umbrella of heart surgery. But while the surgeon does that repair, I would be keeping you alive during your operation using a specialist machine called the heart-lung bypass machine. So for the period that the surgeon is repairing your heart, I'm basically keeping you alive during your operation. And we're the kind of, I'll say we're the unsung heroes. I don't mean that to sound like that, but it's just because nobody knows who we are. Because the time you come into theatre, you're already asleep, you're under a GA, and then we come in after that. And then when you're obviously taken out of the operating theatre, you don't see us. So yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, and thank you for looking after so many people as well. Do you find that job, so fishing, I can only guess that must be incredibly stressful and energy sapping job as well. Do you find fishing is the antidote to that and allows you to get away from that? And also, do you find, coming from a scientific background, that you look at your fishing in a scientific way as well?
I don't actually, surprisingly enough. And going back to the golf thing, one of the last golf club I was a member of, the guy there had asked me, do I ever keep a note of how many putts I make on the green? Because he knew I was a scientist, and he assumed that I would keep a note of these things. And no, I don't, because I don't want to carry my day job into my pleasure time. So no, not at all. And I don't think it would help, because I don't see, as I said, I see fishing as a way to mentally recharge and to take myself away for a day or a long weekend or whatever, and just totally recharge the batteries. So fishing is more. I kind of grew up. I started my fishing career. I've got vivid memories of being 6, 7, 8 years old on my dad's knee on a boat in Loch Shin. I'm lucky enough to have an uncle up there that stays at a place called Corriekenloch. Very, very small place. I think it's got a total of 3 houses, and it's at the far end of Loch Shin. And holidays, summer holidays were always spent there. Spring holidays and stuff from school. My dad would drive up through the night on a Friday night, take my brother, an older brother. He would take us up there, and we'd stay for a good few days. And that's where my fishing started. Going back to those memories of Loch Shin, I remember sitting on my dad's knee and reeling in fish after fish. It probably wasn't quite as easy as that, but the kind of memory, that's what I remember. I remember a huge big white bucket full of trout, and the guys up there that live up there, nothing goes to waste. That's all food. So nowadays you'd be shocked at that, catching that many fish, killing that many fish, but that's the way it is up there. And I just remember catching that many fish, and then on the way back in the boat, my uncle on the kind of engine, and gutting fish as well, just as he was getting us back into the side to finish our day. And that's where my fishing started. So every holiday we'd be up there fishing. I'd be fishing the banks of Loch Shin. I'd be fishing Loch Mertland, which is just above Shin. There's a little loch in between them called Graham. So my brother and I would go and fish them, or we would go and fish the surrounding hill lochs. There's hill lochs up there that you'd be struggling not to catch a fish every cast. It became more of a kind of competition to see whether you could make a cast and fully retrieve it without getting an offer, because the fish are just plentiful up there. Ridiculous. Nothing big, a half pounder's probably a good fish for up there. You get lots of your small stuff, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches. But the place is rammed with fish. There was a series of hill lochs up there called the Gorm Lochs, and there's probably 1 million Gorm Lochs in Scotland, but they all had little interconnecting burns, and you would just work your way up each loch, up the bank, then you'd fish the burns, and again the burns just had as many fish in them as the lochs, and you'd make your way up, and then you would only come home when your belly started to rumble. So you'd make your way back to my uncle's house to get get your dinner. You'd maybe settle down and watch the telly for an hour. Just as it started to get dark, my brother and I would be heading back out onto the banks of Loch Shin, and we'd fish that into 1, 2 in the morning. And the fishing we used to get there was just absolutely mental, crazy fishing. Great fish up to 2 pounds, and they're great wild brown trout. A wild brown trout. I mean, a wild brown trout for me to £1 is a great fish. It's a tremendous fish. we were catching loads of these fish every night, just on wet flies, free wet flies, floating line cast. You don't want to cast 5 or 6 yards out from the bank, and we would, two of us would just hit fish after fish. So that's my memories of growing up fishing, and I see fishing as almost like kind of like crossing the road. You look left and right. That's how fishing is to me. It's ingrained in me because I've done it from such an early age. And the science part of me has only came in. Obviously, I had a keen interest in science at high school. Done another degree in health education before my current job, and then got into that job having to do a master's degree down in London. And so science is a kind of fairly new thing to me, but fishing isn't. So fishing for me is just a way to relax and enjoy life, basically. You know, I feel really. I seen a post on Twitter. I think it was this morning from Matt Hayes, basically saying he feels for people that don't fish. I feel the same. Absolutely feel the same, because it's such a great pastime. It's a great pastime, and you know that might even lead to I'd probably be able to answer another question about competition fishing. But we can maybe let that come up later on. But yeah, certainly. I don't. No, science doesn't play any part in my fishing. Long way around, but yeah, science.
No, like that, and that got me thinking. Lots of questions there, and you said about the Matt Hayes tweet there again. He's been a guest on the podcast, but talking about. I was having this similar conversation with somebody the other day, and I said if I had to explain it, you wouldn't understand it. And there is, and I've said it many times before, that to some of us, it's everything. Our lives revolve around it, the friendships, everything. You're thinking about fishing, you're thinking about. Some people, it's something they do, and I understand that aspect of it as well. But sometimes it just runs so deep, it's really hard to explain how that actually is. But I wanted to talk about, because you've mentioned Rutland, we've talked about grayling fishing, you've talked about the Devon, you talked about the lochs. Before we come on to the competition thing, do you have a favourite, or is it all good as far as you're concerned? Is it moving or stillwater, or is it any of them? What would be the one that if I put your arm behind your back and said, right, which one is it, David? Which one would you choose? Do you have one?
Oh, wow, do I have one? For me, there is nothing better than wild brown trout fishing, whether that be from a loch or from a river round about springtime. I look forward to going to the River Clyde round about late March, April time, looking for those big spring feeders. The Clyde has a phenomenal head of wild brown trout, probably the best marked fish I've ever seen in the UK. And in fact, they are the best in my opinion. I mean, I'm obviously biased there. I remember catching some fish on the River Eden. Matt Eastham had put me on a beat a good few years ago, and that'll bring me back to a story about the jingler. But I remember fishing a jingler there and catching some beautiful brown trout, and they came close to the River Clyde's fish, very similar, but just not quite there. And I apologise to all your Eden anglers out there that think I'm kind of knocking their fish, but the Clyde fish are really, really special. So a great day for me, or my number one day, would be an early spring day on the River Clyde. You know, it's very hard to get a day down there when it's not windy, because the wind just seems to fly right down that valley. So a nice spring day, relatively warm enough to encourage a hatch. We'll usually get Wild Stark Olives first on the Clyde before we see the March Browns, and yeah, the fish there are absolutely phenomenal. And at that time, it's kind of shooty in. It's really easy fishing. Once you see a riser, you would really need to make a bit of an arse of it, to be honest, to not get it. You know, it's easy fishing, but again, it's not going to be a numbers game. So that would probably be my favourite day, either that or maybe a day on a hill loch somewhere, maybe up north. I kind of love that kind of fishing. But most of my recent fishing's been on rivers, fishing dry. So that's probably number one day. There's also another wee river I fish up north, which I'm not going to name because it's quite sacred to me. The guys listening to this that know me will know the river. But that's at the beginning of the Highlands and it's only a 45-minute drive for me from home. And I love a day on that. It's a very small, intimate stream, very clear, very hard fishing. I see it sometimes come up on fishing forums where they name it and the guys always struggle on it because it's so clear, crystal clear water. The fish are very spooky. And in my opinion, the only way to approach those fish are from downstream, casting upstream with a very, very big long leader. Very, very, tip it down to 0.10 and giving them plenty of leads. And yeah, the fishing there's. I love that kind of fishing because you're so far out of the way. You could close your eyes and open them again and think you were in Alaska. Somewhere it's that kind of remote almost. In some of the surrounding, you see a lot of Monroes surrounding that river as well, and they hold snow right into kind of almost late summer. Again, that river for me has got everything. It's got the solitude, it's got the great fishing, great scenery, and again, it's only a short drive from home, and the fishing there can be absolutely phenomenal. Not particularly big fish in it. I think I've been fishing it for on and off for maybe 25 years, and I've had a handful of fish just around about the £3 mark, which is an amazing fish for that river. I'm lucky enough to get maybe 2 or 3 fish about £1 out of each season, and they fish for me are just superb. The ones I've had up to £3 have been real special fish, and no many of them come along. And when you're walking up and down that particular riverbank, usually at the end of the day when I've fished most of the pools, I'll kind of head back up to the car, and you obviously can't help but peering over the edge to have a wee look at what's in the pools, and there's some absolutely massive fish in there, massive fish. And I'll get one at one point, I'll get a real special fish out of it, but it's, I go back to it and I fish it maybe a dozen times each year. It's a great wee river for me. But yeah, a day on that or a day on the Clyde, early springtime, yeah, that's my number. That's my go-to fishing, I would say.
Nice. Well, brown trout do rock. That gave me a really interesting insight into your fishing, that thinking about it, downstream dry fly can work really well. I think I did a podcast and I was I was approaching a fish and live on the river as I was doing it, and it can work really well. And it's lovely to hear when people step outside, as we said, I guess, at the beginning, the comfort zone of what they normally do, chuck it upstream. And sometimes you've got to think that downstream dry fly, while we're talking about it as well, that do you think that, is there any advice that you could give people about trying when to try it? Because I think, and I found that if I'm giving a downstream dry, I've got to wait a little bit before setting on the fish. Do you find that? What other advice would you give people on fishing a downstream dry fly?
I think you've nailed it there, Pete. Yes, give the fish a little bit longer than you would if you were conventionally fishing upstream to them. The first thing, I still get excited when a fish rises. I'm like a wee schoolboy and I think, oh wow, there's fish rising, and I'm right in there. As you're approaching them from downstream, certainly keep your cast nice and short. I learnt from a guy called Vlade Trzbunia, who's an ex-world champion of many years ago, Polish guy, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I met Vlade where was that? 2016 it would have been, at that European Championships I mentioned earlier. He was our guide for that. He guided the Scotland team, and I had some brief conversations with him before. I remember arranging a trip to the San River. The San River was always one of my go-to places, because for a long time I struggled to get a grayling on the dry fly in Scotland. It really ate into me. I'm thinking, how am I not getting these on the dries? And I remember going to a place in the Czech Republic via Dave Downey, one of his guided trips, and I started getting them on the dries there. And that really, I was like, I need to get a grayling on the dry fly in Scotland. Very hard to get, and the San River then came into the fore. There was a lot mentioned about it. It was always in the magazines. I think a guy, is it Jeremy Lucas? He was extolling its virtues for quite a long time, and got in touch with this Vlade Trzbunia, arranged a trip there, arranged a few mates to go over, and then the week before we were meant to go over, Vlade had called me and he said the river's flooded, the water's up by the park benches, it's horrendous, don't come, it'd be a waste of time. So that trip never made. We never made that trip. and I got there to the San River 2017, 2018, and just watching him in action. I'd already been fishing dry fly properly for, I don't know, 10, 15 years for brown trout and grayling on running water. And I thought, this guy has simplified it so much. I'm casting, I've got fly line out the rod tip, casting at fish, all about presentation, all about drift, all about drag free. And Vladdy basically he was stepping into the water with us. He had no fly line out of his tippet. Yeah, sorry, fly line out of the tip of his rod. And all he had was just his tapered leader and just casting from an upstream position, casting downstream, lifting it all back up, laying it down flat again and letting it come over the grayling. Only a yard or two drift, and he was getting fish after fish. He was catching fish that I couldn't get when I was casting to an upstream position. Or even, my favoured position for casting dries is almost directly across from a fish, because you only need that 3 or 4 yard of drift. You should be getting fish by that point. But Vladdy was making it so simple. He just brought everything way back, where I was probably overcomplicating things. Still getting fish, obviously, but not like how Vladdy was getting them. And Vladdy's an older man now. He'll be well in his 70s now. But it was just so interesting to see. He was a proper master. We've got very good dry fly anglers here in Scotland. In fact, in the UK as well, you've got your likes of a guy like Hugh Skeoch, who's a good friend of mine. He's amazing on the Clyde. I've learnt a lot from him. Some of the listeners will know Hugh. You've also got your likes of your Paul Proctor, who he's on social media all the time, a huge big fish. So he's obviously very, very capable. But this guy Vladdy, he was just, for me, he was on another level. And yeah, you've already mentioned it. The best way for presenting dry fly downstream, I think, is just a very short line. Most of the fly line is still in the rod, longest leader, and certainly if anything comes up, you just give it that wee extra half second just to turn back down on it, because that probably takes a wee bit of time to get used to it during the day. Where as soon as the fish comes up, you're probably right into it. But yeah, certainly let the fish take the fly down and then just lift. And nice. Again, it's always a lift. It's never a strike. Dry fly fishing, you never need to be that forceful. So you just be lifting the rod nice and, a nice steady lift, nothing about striking at all. And yeah, great. It's a great way of fishing. Absolutely love that fishing.
Yeah, nice. And I guess fishing a downstream dry as well will give someone, and as you've alluded to and I've talked about many times before as well, the drift is everything. And I think a downstream dry will give you a really good understanding of controlling that fly and the drift as well, if it's a slightly longer drift. So it may be something that listeners, if you're allowed to do it, I know in some places you can't, but generally it's a good way to learn about controlling fly line, controlling leader, and controlling drift as well. So great tips there. Thank you for that. I wanted to move on to the competition side of things, because it seems to me as though with competition angling, you'll either get anglers who are multi-capped, have done it loads and loads of times, or people who have done it to say yes, I guess to fast track their learning process, to get to learn from these amazing European and world anglers as well, and then sort of do it and say, right, that box has been ticked, and then move on. Where do you place yourself within that? And is that a fair assumption to describe how people look at competition angling?
For me, Pete, I mentioned a trip to the Czech Republic. There I met a guy called Robert Murray, and another guy called Kenny Finlayson, around about 2008. And those guys moved my fishing on considerably. Robert was I think after that trip to the Czech Republic, Robert then became the Scottish River champion. Very well deserved. Cracking guy. Robert's a great friend. And he moved my fishing on considerably just by going fishing with him, showing me some methods. Robert brought me on tenfold. Same with Kenny Finlayson on the still waters. Kenny was a very good stillwater angler from the boats. Tremendous. We would have days on Carron Valley, the Lake of Menteith, various other waters. And Kenny brought me on a huge amount as well. I could always fish from a boat, but it was always more Will brown trout tactics. Floating line, wet flies, that kind of thing, muddlers, all that kind of fishing. But these guys certainly brought me on tenfold. I've got a lot to thank these guys for. Not quite in touch with Kenny Finlayson as much as I probably should be. We used to fish all the time, but now that I've kind of moved on to rivers, I don't see Kenny that much. The odd text and phone call. In fact, when I was down south fishing in October there, Gratham and Rutland and Dracut, Kenny had tied me up some flies, so we're still in touch. But I do a lot of my fishing now with Robert and Craig. But anyway, those guys brought me on quite a bit. So from there, Robert was still fishing the nationals. That's the national river events up in Scotland. So you fish when your qualifiers on one of the rivers, and the top so many anglers on the day go through to the final, and then the top 5 or 6 of those guys then go into the international team for the following year to fish against England, Wales and Ireland at one of the home internationals. And so I used to be a controller for Robert Murray. So the controller's job is to measure fish and ensure that the angler that they're paired against is fishing correctly, i.e. within the rules. So I done a lot of controlling for Robert Murray, and I would then be paired with another angler, and off we would go, and I'd watch these anglers fishing, and with the greatest of respect in the world, some of them were pretty hopeless. I don't mean that to be too disrespectful, but they weren't very good, but they were still catching fish and they were getting into finals. And that happened for 2 or 3 years. I thought, what, I could do this. I quite fancy trying this. And I remember one night, I think I was on call that night. It was kind of quite late with work, and I remember firing an email off to one of the SANA, the Scottish Angling National Association, one of their committee members, to say, how can I join the SNIFL, the Scottish National Fly Fishing League? So I got in there, and in my first season, I was in the first division, which was incredibly dense with good anglers. I think of the likes of Alan Hill, who needs no explanation for guys up here and down south. Alan's got a multitude of caps. He was in the first division, so he was somebody I had to try and beat to get into the next level, into the Premier League, so to speak. Dave Downey, I had guys, Keith Renton, lots of very, very good anglers. So my first season, I finished just below those guys, which was probably the best I could hope for, because these guys were seasoned campaigners. They were great anglers. So I done okay there. You kind of fish 5 or 6 events through the year. One was a Stillwater in Carron Valley, kind of held my own there, and the others were rivers like the Tweed, the Don, the Clyde. So yeah, you kind of fish them. So as I said, my first season I done okay. Finished just below the really top guys, and then the next year I managed to finish second. Had led the league all the way, and on the last day, the last event, it was the River Clyde, my home water. I'm a favourite for it. All I had to do was catch one fish. That's all I needed, and I dropped 2 at the net. Everyone that, I hate saying this, because everyone that competition fishes has got a hard luck story. Everybody in the field that day will have a hard luck story. So I managed to throw away first place for second place, but anyway, got me a silver medal, and then I was up into the proper big boy league, and from there I got a chance to fish the World Championships in Bosnia 2015. That was my first event. And that's like the World Cup, the World Cup of football. The World Cup of fishing. That's where all the big boys came out. We sent a team over there. As I said, that was my first real championship, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Bosnia is a beautiful place. The people there are very, very friendly. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I remember when we went through we flew into Croatia, crossed the border into Bosnia, and it was a few-hour drive. We stopped at a wee roadside cafe. We had lunch, a couple of beers with the boys, and we went to tip the waitress. That we tipped her, reasonably okay, and she was offended by the amount of money we gave her, because we gave her, which to her was quite a lot of money, and she was instantly offended. And the guide we had at the time had said, "You're giving her too much money." And that just amazed me because nobody would turn around and say that. Oh, so the Bosnian people are lovely, lovely people. That whole 2-week spell I had there was, it was tremendous. But I think it was only tremendous also because I'd done so well in the championship. I had 5 sessions there. I think my first session I had 7 fish, which put me 4th. My second session I had 6 fish, which put me 3rd. And I was sitting quite pretty after the first day's event, and I'm thinking, oh, this competition fishing is great. I love this. This is brilliant. And I come right back down to earth on the 3rd session, which was the competition was held over 3 days, 2 sessions the first day, 1 session the second day, and then your final 2 sessions on the 3rd day. So the second day we were fishing Lake, I think it was called Lake Pleva, is it? Yeah, or maybe not. I can't remember now. We're fishing the lake, and the lake was tough. The lake was a tough venue. On practice, I only had 1 lock up and dropped it. The rest of the guys that was out were doing much the same in practice. So on the day, fishing this big lake, and I had 6 follows up to the boat. I had a proper lock up, and I dropped it at the net. And I'm thinking, oh, just 1 fish would have put me so high up that leaderboard. And I was sharing the boat with an American guy. His name escapes me. It'll probably come back to me. He dropped his rod because he had a tangle in his bag with his fly line, and he was down. He was untangling his fly line, and then when he picked his rod back up, there was a fish on it. And then he just put his rod away for the rest of the session because one fish was good enough. I think the person that won that session that day had 2 fish, and that was a Bosnian guy, the Bosnian member. So yeah, I blanked on that, and then that dropped me away down. So I was quite despondent that day. Came back the last day, and during our practice sessions, during one of the rest days, we were allowed to walk the competition stretch, and we came across this river, this beat. That was a big, long, flat cam that had tons of grayling in it. And the guy that was looking after that stretch said, "Watch this." And he scrunched a packet of crisps up, opened the packet of crisps, and tipped them into the river. And you seen all the grayling come up. The place was black with grayling, black, fish rising everywhere. And we all said to ourselves that day, I wish we get drawn that beat. And did I not get drawn that beat for beat 4, for my session 4? It was just dry fly heaven. I had 3 rods with me. I set all 3 rods up with dry flies because that's all you could fish. And on that bridge, all the locals came to watch, and I sat there and had some of the best dry fly fishing I've ever had. I had 17 fish recorded, and I must have dropped maybe twice as many as that are hooked or jagged, and it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And then my last session, I had 1 fish out of a beat that produced no fish. Now, that in itself was never going to win me anything, but for me, that was a great championship. I came out of that high as a kite because I thought, this is amazing. And I ended up staying in Sniffle for another 2 years, got another 2 caps, went to the 5 Nations event in Ireland. We managed to win that. We managed to beat the Irish in their home water, which is quite something. That's a big thing to go over to another team's waters and beat them. So we got the gold medal for that as a team. I wasn't particularly outstanding in that championship. I was quite steady. The other guys in my team, they were producing amazing performances, winning heats out of the park. I was just quite steady, just catching fish and what have you, doing okay. And then my last one was the European Championships in Poland, and that for me was enough. I remember we went to Poland with some great guys, but not a particularly strong team. We didn't fish very well, the whole team. We had Vlad as our guide, who tried his best with us. The river we fished was called the Lapala, which is a very small, intimate stream, very tree lined, very dirty, very, very, very snaggy. There was lots of fallen trees in the river. You were forever losing nymphs. It was a really hard technical river to fish. And again, it was single nymph or double nymph, very, very small nymphs. And I hate nymph fishing with a passion. I especially hate it now after all that 2 weeks in Poland. That probably cemented how I hate nymph fishing, because it was constantly nymphing. And obviously you do that to get the best results for your team. Again, with a poor result as a team, we get criticised for that coming back, and that was enough for me. I remember, each session's 3 hours. And I remember maybe half an hour to go each session. I remember saying to myself, why am I here? I spent a lot of money to get here. That money I could have used for a family holiday. Felt quite guilty, because you're spending thousands of pounds to represent your country. You're not getting sponsored. You're not getting anything, any help towards that, unless, in fact, you're just not. You need to find that money yourself. So I remember feeling quite guilty about spending that kind of money out the family household, and thinking that I could have taken my missus, my daughter away a nice holiday somewhere. But rather, here I am chasing a cap in some other country, competition fishing for something that I wasn't particularly enjoying anymore. And I remember my last session kind of cheered me up. The guy that was controlling for me was a Polish local who could speak decent English, and he had told me that the last 2 anglers on here had blanked. So when you hear that, you think, oh great, it's going to be rock hard. And I'm sitting there half an hour to go before the heat starts, and there's a few pale wateries coming off, and I thought, oh, surely if there's fish here, something will come up and have a wee go at them. So for half an hour, these pale wateries started streaming off, and sure enough, this big long flat, there was fish popping everywhere. And right away, I'm in there, and I'm getting fish on dries, and I'm loving it again. And then the last half hour, it went really quiet again, and then I'm starting thinking, right, okay, I'm done here. And in my head, I'm picturing. Sorry, I'm spelling out an email to the SANA committee guys responsible for the team, resigning my position. I was only 36 then, 35, 36, and I'm going to retire young because I've had enough. I shouldn't be feeling that way. I should be right up for it. So I think at that point, competition fishing had become more of a chore than something that should be pleasurable. And all through my fishing career, fishing has been enjoyable for me. It's been a way to release pressure. But when you're competition fishing, you can't start to enjoy it until you start getting fish, because you don't want to let your teammates down. If you're blanked the whole session, it's not a great feeling. You need to come back to your teammates and say, lads, I blanked here. Sorry, that's hurt us badly. So I hated that. I really, couldn't get to grips with that. And fishing I stopped enjoying my fishing when I was competition fishing, because you constantly had to go out practicing as well. If you had a heat on the Clyde, you'd need to go down the Clyde the week before, practice your nymphing, find where fish were. And also one of the major things as well is it was never a level playing field, because if you guys that don't know, the listeners that don't know, your competition stretch could be 200-300 yards long. No one was allowed to come into that stretch, so you had 3 hours to maximise how many fish you could catch out of that stretch. But the guy below you, his 300 yards could be full of better water, and he could have more fish in his beat. So right away, he's not starting from a level playing field. He's starting a few rungs up on you, and you could also be drawing a stretch of water that historically over the last, 10 years of competing on that stretch, had maybe only produced 1 fish every session, and the next beat down could historically produce 20 fish a session. So if you're going into your one beat that's only produced 1 fish a session, and you're getting your 1 fish or 2 fish even, that should mean more than the guy that's catching 10 out of his beat, that produces normally 20, but he would beat you because he had more fish. So it was never a level playing field for me. And as much as I've came from a kind of competitive upbringing in terms of, used to play a lot of racket sports, football as well, they're proper competitive sports. I just couldn't find fishing as competitive. So ultimately, I gave up on that, having scratched that itch, had 3 caps, thoroughly, overjoyed with my caps, great memories, made some cracking friends, increased my fishing ability as well tenfold. Met some cracking guys, as I say, guys that are still best mates to this day. But it was certainly enough for me. 3 or 4 years competing, that was more than enough. And I've had offers to go back in. They're looking to fill the leagues again, but no chance, absolutely no chance. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant there, Pete. But yeah, it was certainly competition fishing. It's, as I say, I've scratched that itch, and now it's done. I'll very, very, very unlikely ever go back to it.
Nice. And that sort of takes us round to the beginning where we talked about fishing and what it means to you in a different way. It would be, we're going to start winding things down now, but it would be very rude of me not to talk to you about tackle as well. And your social media handle is Sage Circa, which is a rod, which I think speaks volumes about how your fishing actually has changed, because I see it probably more so as a dry fly rod than anything else that Sage brought that didn't last a great length of time. Although it's one of those ones, and when I was thinking about this, it's one of those rods. I had an 8'9" 3-weight, and I've sort of kind of kicked myself for moving that one on, because it is and particularly with my love affair with rods going in different direction towards bamboo and glass, that really is a perfect stepping stone between them, really, isn't it? And is that how you find that? And is that something well, I know this because I said in the introduction, a tackle hoarder. Is that something that you love playing with and looking with different rods and searching out new and interesting rods?
I can't believe you sold your 8'9" 3-weight. That's a shocker, Pete. That's a shocker. I'm looking at it right now. That's got pride of place on my rod rack. That's a great rod for me. I'm scared to try bamboo and glass, because if I love them, then I'm going to want to spend more money on them. My passion are Sage rods, and probably since I could afford them, I always tend to buy 2 or 3 new rods a year. My last purchase was a Sage X 9'5". Oh, sorry, no, I tell a lie. My last purchase was a 8'9" 3-weight Trout LL, and I think Sage were always known as a producer of really fast rods, casting rods, tools. Casting was never a particular interest of mine in terms of it was a tool to get the job done. I went from very fast rods like the XP, the Z-Axis, the Sage 1, and now I've started to come back a little bit, because now I'm in, like we said, the Sage Circa, which is, as you'll know, Pete, that's an incredibly different rod from what Sage have been producing lately, or even in the past. That's one of the most slowest action rods I've ever fished with. I think to get even slower again, I would need to go to Kane. I've never tried a glass rod, so I can't really comment on that. But the Sage Circa, especially for that little stream I mentioned, I fish up north, absolutely perfect. I team that up with a Real Gold, just so I can load it a little bit quicker at shorter distances. I don't need to be forever false casting. And that rod for me it only ever struggles if there's a decent wind. Then I feel like I'm struggling to get the line out. Recently, I've been fishing that LL, the 8'9" 3-weight. Again, because I've been fishing the Circa for so long, you get used to that action. It's almost muscle memory, because you're so in tune with the timing of your casting, that the LL was just a touch on the faster side. But again, for that river, whenever it was windy, that would be absolutely perfect. And I fished the LL with one of the Rio LT floating lines, and a weight forward 3. And again, I find that's absolutely perfect for that. My bread and butter rod for most of my trout fishing on the rivers used to be a 9-foot ZXL from Sage, and I cried that Excalibur. That used to be that's what that's name was, Excalibur. And only in the last season or two, I bought the Sage Mod. I don't know if you're familiar with that rod, but that's again 9-foot 4-weight. But the blank on that was horrendous for me. You can see it on pictures online. It's a Marmite green. It's almost an luminous green, and you either love it or you don't. And I didn't like it, and I'm surprised I bought it. And I managed to move that on to my mate Robert, who, being a Celtic fan, he absolutely loves that rod. It's almost a Celtic kind of colour of blank, so that's made for him. I moved on to the 9-foot 4-weight LL, Trout LL, and that took me a little bit of time to get used to that rod, because it was so different to the ZXL. Again, still on the kind of medium side, not entirely slow, not entirely fast, but that took me a long time to get used to that, and it's only this season I've given it a complete run out, and I'm in love with that rod. Absolutely love that rod. So I've certainly moved from the really fast Sage stuff down to the more kind of moderate action, kind of medium action with the Trout LL and the Circa as well. Great rods, absolutely great rods. I love them.
And that echoes what we talk about so many times on this podcast about the action of the rod as well. And I'm sure you'll say as well, the ability to play fish as well, rather than a stiffer rod.
Yeah.
We've had Peter Knox on here, who designs rods for Sage as well, who talks about those in quite some depth. You said about the mod. I had the mod. I think I had one of the few 9'2" weights that made it over to the UK. And I think the blank as a whole was a really good blank. I think, as you've rightly said, that the colour was probably too much and too radical for the marketplace at the time. But I thought the blank was a very fine one. And even that I could use at a push on very small streams for nymphing as well. I used it once or twice and was very pleased at how good that was as well when I needed to do that at winter time. Let's move on from there, because that's a lovely insight into rods, and again echoes what we talk about, as I've said before so many times on the podcast. The piece you've written about in Fly Culture was about the SAN and the company of good friends. Do you have now do you have a dream destination? Where is the place that you would love to visit and go cast a dry fly at some trout?
I mean, I'd imagine what most people say, New Zealand is high up there. Not so much for me, because I've heard a few different stories. I've heard you can go in days and days and days without even seeing a fish, never mind getting a fish. I think New Zealand, way back it was obviously a haven for, that was the kind of number one destination for most folk. But I think because of the stuff that's on YouTube, you can almost be there now from the comfort of your own home. So that's kind of lost a little bit of love for me. I would love to go to Montana. I would love to do that. There was a World Championships there a few years ago, Colorado, sorry, and some of the Scottish guys there, said the fishing was absolutely phenomenal. I would love to try that. Hopefully, when travel becomes a bit more normal, once we're over this pandemic at some point. I've done the SAN twice now, so I would probably like to go back there again. Jurassic Lake also comes up. I see that on social media as well. That looks absolutely phenomenal. No idea how expensive that would be. That could be mentally expensive. But the videos I see there, that just looks absolutely phenomenal. The wind doesn't really appeal. Every video I've seen, it looks like the guys are getting blown off their feet almost. That's got a little bit of river fishing as well. But yeah, maybe Montana, actually. Yeah, I'd quite like to go to Montana, I think. That looks absolutely ideal.
Good choice. And that sort of lends itself, as does Colorado, as for just booking your flight, hiring a car and driving. And I think that's why I like it. And it's not so difficult to get to as well. And, those beautiful fish in New Zealand do take some travel to get there. But that's why I think I prefer Montana and Colorado to those sorts of places. So yeah, absolutely. It's been wonderful chatting with you. We talked for well over an hour now. If people want to find you on social media, how do they find you, David?
So I use Twitter quite a bit. Again, my username's Sage Circa. I might need to change that to Sage Trout LL because given that's probably my favourite rod now. So I'm on there. I talk most things about fishing and a bit of football as well. Very little about work. Try to keep my work stuff out of that, to be honest. But yeah, they can find me at Sage Circa on Twitter.
Brilliant. David, it's been brilliant. Like you say, you'd written for Eat, Sleep, Fish, you've written for Fly Culture. I feel it's been lovely to talk to you, having, I guess, virtually known you for quite some time now. And it's been lovely to speak with you. I've really enjoyed your honesty, openness about so many subjects that we've talked about today. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Well, everyone, that's another wrap on a Fly Culture podcast. There'll be another one next week. I hope you have enjoyed this one as much as me. I've really enjoyed talking with David today. As ever, if you are enjoying them, please consider subscribing, but there'll be another one very, very soon. So thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.